And now, the best 60-ish seconds of your week.
And this week, the Democrats head to Chicago for their political convention. You know, several times I've analogized this year to 1968 and all the turmoil and tumult that resulted from that process, including a really disastrous convention for the Democrats in Chicago, Illinois, as the streets were filled with tens of thousands of protesters, in that instance against the Vietnam War. But this time, thousands threatening to come on Chicago and descend upon it during the course of the Democrat convention to protest Israel and its war against the Hamas terrorists who devastated Israel back in October. How effective that's going to be, we'll have to see, but it threatens to be very disruptive for the Democrats. But, you know, the more I've looked at it, I think that this election is more analogous to 2004, when we had John Kerry, who looked like a formidable candidate, flip-flopping all over the place on his positions, look at Kamala Harris, and being accused rightly of stolen valor. And that's coming to the fore with the vice presidential nominee, Governor Walz, who has some real splaining to do on that one. So the Democrats will spend the week trying to hide Joe Biden. In fact, I understand they're going to have him on Monday night, which is normally reserved for low-level party officials, et cetera, because, bluntly, nobody's really paying attention. And then they'll put him out of sight and focus on Kamala Harris and whichever position she chooses to take during the course of the week. The real issue is she going to say she's for the previous positions she took, for example, on ICE, or on her absolute ban on fracking, not a little bit, absolute, and a full ban on fracking, or the gun grab? And you can say, oh, it wasn't really a grab. Well, yes, it is. When you've got a mandatory buyback, which she was promoting, that is a gun grab. Or worse yet, her positions previously on national health care, where she bought in full scale with Bernie Sanders and taking away people's private insurance plans. That's what she wanted. She said that was the best public policy. And yet now she says, oh, maybe not, maybe not, maybe not. And how about ICE? How about the Green New Deal? Where is she on that now? Well, what she tells us is that she's going to run away from Joe Biden's policies as fast as she can. But she's been a part of that for the last 3.5 years. How do you manage to convince the American people otherwise? Now she says, job one for me on day one is going to be fixing the economy by getting inflation under control. Well, there are two questions that arise there. One, where's she been for the last 1,250 days? And what about the remaining 150 days of their term? What's she going to do? And how's she going to separate herself from her boss, whom she said she was the last person in the room with when they went after the withdrawal, the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, et cetera? I mean, she wanted it one way just a few weeks ago, wants it a totally different way now and tomorrow, and who knows where she ultimately ends up, except we really do. If, God forbid, she did manage to get elected, she would be as far to the left as you possibly could be. She would be the most progressive president, I hate that word progressive, but the most ultra-liberal president we've ever had, and this is, without any question, the most far-left ticket that has ever been put in front of the American people. And when your friends on the Democrat side say, oh, what do you think? Ask them to name just one. They won't be able to do it. So off to Chicago for the Democrats. We'll see how much turmoil there is in the streets. But inside, it will be a love fest, but one totally devoid of any real meaning. Because this is a ticket that won't do press conferences, that won't answer real questions, that won't talk to the American people, but rather will read off of teleprompters and prepared scripts, reading other people's words to the American people. How long that lasts, we're going to have to see. But I'm here to say that if we do our job, it won't last long. And just a quick comment on Tim Walz's problems, and they are magnitudinous. I mean, this guy is as far to the left as you can possibly get, trying to convince the American people that he's just a regular Joe from the Midwest. But the real issue that's going to haunt him, in my judgment, is this question of his military service. And look, I didn't serve, so I'm really, really cautious about criticizing anything about any who did. But he's right. We should say thank you to anybody who served and leave it at that. But he wanted to embellish what he did. And that's where he gets into real problems. If he had simply said, I served for 24 years, I think America would have simply said thank you. But no, he had to embellish his rank, he had to embellish his service, and he didn't want to tell people why he left the National Guard when he did. Those questions all demand answers, and he says, oh, it's not fair to ask, critique, or criticize my record. You simply should say thank you. And again, we would, if that's all there were. It's the embellishment that causes trouble. We've seen it right here in my own home state, where a former state representative and state senator wanted to say more than he actually did. If he had simply said, this is my record, I think people would have said great. But he, for some reason, internally and, psychologically, had to say he did more, and he hadn't. We're going to have to see how all this works out, but my judgment is it's not going to work out well for Tim Walz. And where it did work out for America was in the Olympics. Look, I tried not to watch that much after that opening ceremony disaster and debacle with the blasphemy that we saw there. There wasn't quite as much of that in the closing ceremony. But again, what does Lucifer have to do with the Olympics? I mean, it's just, we walk into this crazy stuff and it really is troubling. But we'll move that aside for a second and focus on the positive, and that is that the Americans brought home the gold. They tied China for the first time ever, by the way, a tie for the gold medals, but for the bronze and the silvers, they really ran the table. And especially the American women, who we've talked about the last couple of weeks, and how proud we are of what they did. If they were an independent nation, they would have finished third in the medal contest. And there are two women that I especially want to mention today. I've talked about a couple of others previously, and how proud we were to see how proud they were of being Americans. But two women in particular, Sidney McLaughlin and Katie Ledecky. Katie Ledecky, now the most decorated woman in Olympic history, American woman in Olympic history. Both of these women putting their faith on full view for the entire world, telling everyone how much Jesus Christ meant to them, not only in their pursuit of Olympic gold and the phenomenal success that they had, but also in their quest for a better and good life. So God bless them. God bless America. Thank you to all of the athletes who did so incredibly well and made America proud and made us happy to watch them showing the world how proud they were to be Americans. And one final Olympian I want to mention, Brittany Griner, who didn't always show great respect for the United States or our flag. In fact, showed a lot of disrespect, but who spent some time in a Russian gulag and was released not that long ago. Picked up a gold medal with the American women, and when she mounted the stage to get her medal, it was a very different story. She stood there at attention with her hand over her heart, and equally significant, with tears streaming down her cheeks. She knows what it really is to be an American and how great it is not to be in some other places in this world. Finally, here's another little thought for those in central Pennsylvania, my home area. My congressional district has a Democrat candidate who doesn't live in the congressional district. Now, technically, that's allowed under U.S. law. It's the only office I can think of where you don't have to live in the district in order to run to represent it, but you don't for Congress. But you got to ask, why would somebody want to run to represent citizens that aren't their neighbors, that they don't live with, that they don't really have any real connection to? Well, you can ask that question and answer it for yourself, but here's what's interesting. Janelle Stelson, that's her name, who doesn't live in the congressional district, sent a postcard to my house this week. It looked like it was handwritten, but I know it wasn't. There's a lot of fakery now that's allowing folks to make it look like they've personally written handwritten notes, but they're machine generated. This came from one of her volunteers asking us to vote against Scott Perry and for Janelle Stelson. What was fascinating was it was postmarked in Santa Barbara, California. So not only does Janelle not live in the district, her volunteers live a long way from the district, 3,000 miles away. And you got to ask, what's going on with all these outside groups wanting to change our member of Congress? And for now, that is the best 60-ish seconds of your week. And stay tuned for one little video clip that we're happy to bring you once again.
Ma'am, the U.S. is experiencing record inflation, the worst in 30 years, way beyond expectations. OPEC didn't increase oil production. Can you tell us a little bit about how you would prevent the new spending and your Build Back Better agenda from exacerbating the problem? And also, what else are you going to do to fix this problem with inflation?
All right, thank you. Well, let's start with this. Prices have gone up, and families and individuals are dealing with the realities of that bread costs more, that gas costs more. And we have to understand what that means. That's about the cost of living going up.
A bullshit. A bullshit. A bullshit.